Rain drifted across the Georgia sky in slow silver sheets as Sarah Mitchell guided her children up the narrow dirt road that hadn't seen a tire track in years. She clutched Lily's small hand while Danny carried the old flashlight, its beam flickering like a tired firefly fighting to stay alive. The trees leaned in close, branches swaying as if whispering warnings to anyone foolish enough to continue forward. Sarah had spent her whole life walking into places she didn't belong, cramped rental homes, break rooms with peeling paint, and countless overnight shifts that paid just enough to keep her afloat. But this was different. The mansion rose through the mist like something pulled from an old American folktale, tall, weathered, majestic, and eerie. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten monument that had been silently waiting for someone brave, or reckless, enough to wake it. A heavy brass key in her pocket felt warm against her palm, almost alive. She didn't understand why her grandmother had left her something so impossible. She didn't know if she was meant to claim it or simply uncover what time had tried to bury. But as the wind groaned through the broken shutters and the first bolt of lightning split the sky, Sarah felt an unfamiliar sensation stirring inside her chest. It wasn't fear. It was destiny calling her name from the shadows. The moment Sarah pushed open the heavy front door, a wave of cool, undisturbed air spilled into the night like breath escaping a sleeping giant. Dust swirled in pale clouds, catching the dim light and forming ghost-like shapes suspended in the quiet. Furniture lay beneath white sheets that drooped over tall chairs and broad tables like forgotten ghosts performing a final bow. The wallpaper, once elegant, peeled in long curling strips that revealed older layers beneath, each carrying a chapter of time. Lily tiptoed forward, her curly hair bouncing with every cautious step, whispering, "Mommy, was this her real house?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She ran her fingertips across a framed photo on the wall, her grandmother standing beside a smiling country musician, his arm draped over her shoulders with a familiarity Sarah never knew existed. Danny wandered into the dining room, his flashlight scanning across crystal dishes set neatly on a long table as if awaiting guests who never returned. The house felt untouched, preserved by silence rather than care. The deeper Sarah walked, the stronger the pull became, as though the mansion itself recognized her. She sensed secrets embedded in the walls, moments lived, choices left unexplained, and mysteries layered so tightly they created a gravity all their own. Something in this place belonged to her, even if she didn't yet know what. On their second visit, with daylight softening the weight of the unknown, Sarah stepped through the mansion with a steadier resolve. She had slept poorly, replaying the images she'd seen, pictures of her grandmother that didn't match the quiet, reserved woman she remembered. Sarah held the flashlight high as she entered a room lined with tall shelves, the scent of aged paper drifting like gentle smoke. The library felt alive in a way no other part of the house did. Books filled the shelves in perfect rows, untouched by dust, as though someone had visited this room far more recently than the rest. Danny explored the edges, tapping each panel with a curious rhythm, searching for hollow spots the way he had seen detectives do in mystery shows. Lily sat cross-legged on an old rug, humming softly as she traced shapes in the faded fabric. Then Danny froze. "Mom," he whispered, pointing toward a book that jutted out half an inch farther than the rest. It was barely noticeable, yet its placement felt intentional. Sarah approached, heart pounding in anticipation. When she tugged the book, a metallic click echoed through the room like a lock admitting defeat. The shelf trembled and then swung open with slow, heavy resistance. Behind it, a faint green glow seeped through the darkness, illuminating a steel door that didn't belong in any century this mansion was built. Sarah's voice cracked. "What is this place?" But part of her already knew this was the threshold her grandmother meant her to cross. The vault door hummed quietly, almost welcoming, as Sarah pressed her palm against the glowing biometric pad. A thin beam of light swept across her skin in a smooth arc, followed by a series of mechanical clunks deep within the steel frame. Locks disengaging with the precision of a machine that had been waiting decades for this moment. When the door finally opened, cool air drifted from within, carrying the sharp scent of metal and time preserved. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with thick folders, carefully labeled boxes, and envelopes bearing her grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. Danny's wide eyes darted from shelf to shelf, while Lily clung to Sarah's leg, whispering, "It's cold in here, Mommy." Sarah stepped inside carefully, aware that she was walking into a part of her grandmother's life she had never imagined existed. She picked up a leather-bound folder and opened it slowly, revealing contracts, deeds, and investment documents she could barely comprehend. Her grandmother had managed properties in multiple states, invested in companies long before they became household names, and held shares in ventures Sarah once believed only wealthy families ever touched. Nothing aligned with the woman she remembered, quiet, modest, gentle. It felt like discovering her grandmother had lived two lives, the one Sarah knew and the one she kept hidden behind steel walls and silence. The weight of that truth settled heavy in her chest. Danny's voice broke the stillness. "Mom, you need to see this." He held a folder thicker than the rest, its edges worn from use rather than age. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in looping handwriting Sarah recognized instantly as belonging to the famous musician whose albums her grandmother used to hum along to. The letters were warm, sincere, personal. They spoke of decisions made side by side, business ventures planned over coffee at kitchen tables, and trust built during years few people knew they had shared. Her grandmother hadn't been a quiet background figure in someone else's success. She had been a partner, advisor, and confidant. A lump rose in Sarah's throat as she read the words of gratitude, admiration, and recognition. She had spent years believing her grandmother lived a simple, ordinary life, yet these pages revealed a legacy of strength, intelligence, and quiet power. Lily wandered toward a small table and opened a drawer, revealing a polished wooden box with a silver latch. Inside were stacks of crisp bills, wrapped neatly in paper bands that looked untouched by air. Sarah stared, breath shallow. This wasn't pocket change. It was wealth, organized, protected, intentional. Suddenly her grandmother's final words in the letter found earlier echoed in her memory. "You will understand why I prepared this for you." The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a tide rising fast. Beyond the first chamber lay a second door, smaller, older, secured by a traditional mechanical lock with a brass plate engraved with her grandmother's initials. Taped beside it was an envelope bearing Sarah's name in elegant cursive. Her hands trembled as she slid the note free. The combination written inside was simple, but carried the emotional weight of a confession. With each number she turned, the dial clicked softly, echoing through the vault like a heartbeat. When the lock released, the door swung open to reveal a space filled with metal safe deposit boxes stacked neatly along the walls. Every box had its key inserted, waiting. In the center sat a leather journal, embossed with the same initials on the brass plate. Sarah lifted the journal first. It contained entries documenting her grandmother's careful decisions, the risks she took, the partnerships she trusted, and the quiet sacrifices she made to secure a future she never told anyone about. The final pages described her hope that Sarah would break free from the struggles she had endured her entire adult life. Sarah's throat tightened. She had spent years cleaning office trash bins, scraping together gas money, and praying rent wouldn't rise again. Yet here lay evidence that someone had been silently protecting her from afar, building a foundation for a future she didn't know she was allowed to imagine. Sarah opened the first safe deposit box with a hesitant turn. Inside lay corporate bonds worth more than she had earned in years of non-stop labor. The next box revealed gold coins sealed in airtight cases, each labeled with its year and purity. A third held stock certificates in companies she had only seen on national news broadcasts, names associated with innovation, technology, and industries that shaped everyday life. Her breath grew uneven as she opened box after box, each unveiling another hidden layer of a fortune that didn't feel real. Danny counted out loud, pausing each time the value surpassed anything they had ever imagined owning. Lily touched the gold coins gently, whispering, "Are these real?" Sarah could barely nod. The room spun around her as the magnitude of everything revealed itself, carefully constructed wealth totaling hundreds of millions. But beneath the staggering numbers lay something far more powerful, the realization that her grandmother had lived with intention, with foresight, with love expressed not through spoken words but through meticulous actions. Sarah felt the weight of that love settle on her shoulders like a mantle she wasn't sure she deserved. She had never asked for any of this, never expected life to offer her anything beyond survival. Yet here she was, standing in a vault filled with enough resources to change her family's trajectory forever. The final safe deposit box held only a single envelope, sealed with wax. Sarah cracked it open with care. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's familiar script, dated just days before she passed. The words were heartfelt, raw, and vulnerable, explaining how the fortune had grown across decades, how trust had been placed in the right hands, and how loyalty had been rewarded not with fame or spotlight, but with financial stability that surpassed anything Sarah had ever known. Her grandmother expressed regret for keeping so many secrets, but she admitted fear as well, fear that the world would exploit her family if they ever learned the truth. She left detailed instructions: whom Sarah could trust, whom she should avoid, and what steps were necessary to protect the children. Midway through the letter, a single line made Sarah's knees weaken. "This is not riches, it is a shield." Her grandmother had fought battles Sarah never knew existed. She had guarded wealth that could have destroyed their lives if exposed. And now, she entrusted everything to Sarah, not as a reward but as a responsibility. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, realizing her grandmother hadn't been leaving behind luxury. She had been passing down a legacy built from courage, wisdom, and unshakable love. The gravity of the situation demanded answers Sarah couldn't gather alone. She drove to the nearest city, heart pounding the entire way, feeling as though invisible eyes followed her from the mansion to the highway. Danny kept glancing in the rear view, while Lily clutched her backpack as if protecting a secret treasure. They checked into a small motel where the air conditioner hummed louder than the highway outside. The next morning, Sarah walked into a law office with floors so polished they reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. She carried a carefully organized folder containing photographs of the vault's contents, scans of documents, and her grandmother's final note. Attorney Thomas Bradford listened in stunned silence as she explained what she found. He examined the evidence with a seriousness that made Sarah's pulse race. Finally, he spoke words she wasn't ready to hear. Everything was legitimate. Every signature, every deed, every investment was valid. The assets were now hers, but legality wasn't the only concern. Bradford leaned forward, voice dropping. Wealth of this magnitude carried risks: people who might come forward claiming blood ties, opportunists who would fabricate stories, criminals who would see her as a target. Sarah swallowed hard as he detailed what she needed: security, financial advisors, and discreet planning. It was a world she had never imagined joining, and yet she felt the quiet strength her grandmother had woven into every choice she made. Sarah nodded, understanding that stepping into this new reality meant facing more than riches. It meant confronting danger. That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, Sarah sat in the dim motel room, staring at the ceiling textured like ripples in sand. Her mind replayed everything she had discovered: the letters, the hidden vault, the staggering wealth, and the caution woven into her grandmother's words. She felt the weight of the money like a second heartbeat, steady, powerful, constant. Danny rolled over in his bed, mumbling softly, while Lily curled into a ball, clutching a stuffed animal she had carried since kindergarten. Sarah's heart tightened. They had endured nights without power, days when food barely stretched across the week, and years of uncertainty. This fortune changed those struggles instantly, yet the fear remained. Wealth could lift them out of hardship, but it also drew shadows she wasn't sure she knew how to fight. She opened her grandmother's journal again, flipping through pages filled with wisdom, careful calculations, and intimate reflections she had never heard aloud. Her grandmother had lived with quiet courage. She had protected her family without needing recognition. Sarah whispered into the stillness, "How did you do all this alone?" The journal didn't answer, but Sarah felt an overwhelming clarity. She was no longer powerless. She was the guardian now, and she would learn to carry that mantle, not for herself, but for the generations that would come after her. The next morning, Sarah drove back to the mansion, unwilling to leave loose ends in a place carrying so much hidden meaning. The sun cast long beams through the trees, illuminating the old house in a soft golden haze that made it look less menacing and more like a relic waiting to be revived. She walked through each room with slower steps this time, touching surfaces she had rushed past before. She traced her fingers along the banister her grandmother once held, opened drawers filled with handwritten recipes, and examined shelves with small trinkets collected across decades. Everything felt deliberate. Nothing about this house had been abandoned emotionally, only physically. Sarah thought about the footsteps she had heard upstairs on their first visit, the flicker of light that moved across an otherwise dark hallway. She knew now it wasn't imagination. Someone had been inside, but she also knew something else. Whoever had been there didn't understand the vault the way she did. They hadn't unlocked the secrets meant only for her. She secured every entrance, checking windows and doors, her movements sharper and more confident. The mansion no longer felt like a stranger's home. It felt like a threshold, an entryway into a life built for her, though she hadn't realized it. The house held both warning and welcome, and Sarah recognized she was meant to walk forward with equal parts caution and courage. As the final streaks of daylight faded behind the tall pines, Sarah stood in the grand living room, holding the journal to her chest. She felt her grandmother's presence in every corner, steady, protective, resolute. The truth was no longer hidden beneath decaying boards or steel doors. It was alive with